The Sarasota County Bar Association is a proud partner in bringing you Law and Sarasota. With voluntary membership of over 900 lawyers and judges, the Sarasota County Bar Association is your community's leader in advancing legal professionalism, practice development, and public service. Visit www.sarasotabar.com for more information and to use the online directory list to find an attorney.
This program is brought to you by a grant from the Community Foundation of Sarasota County and the Sarasota County Bar Association. The Education Channel produces the program and broadcasts from its state-of-the-art campus on Beneva Road. They make this program possible.
Welcome to Law in Sarasota. This program has the goal of educating the public on ways the law interacts with the daily lives of our citizens. Sarasota County government has enacted ordinances that control what we can legally do on our own property, as well as what is not allowed to be done on public property. Some regulations are designed to protect the environment. Others are adopted to ensure that persons who perform certain types of labor have the necessary skills to do the work safely and in compliance with standard building codes. There's a lot of them. Most of us know little about them, and we're surprised when we innocently do something that runs afoul of an ordinance. Others intentionally violate well-known code provisions, either to save money or because they don't have the necessary certifications to do the work. When violations occur and the county finds out about it, it has adopted a process to abate or correct the problem. This is the topic of today's program, the Sarasota County Code Enforcement Program. And we have a lawyer as a guest who is at the center of code enforcement. She serves as a special magistrate, and she sits in judgment over whether a violation in fact has occurred, and if proven, what penalties should be imposed. She has decades of experience in this position. She's going to educate us about how alleged violations are resolved and describe the incredibly varied types of cases that she sees. Her name is Meg Whitmer, and we appreciate her taking time from a busy law practice to share her knowledge of this subject. So, welcome, Meg.
Thank you for having me.
So let's talk briefly about your background. Where'd you go to school, and how'd you get into the business of being a special magistrate?
So I'm fortunate enough to be a Sarasota resident as in my adolescent years. I went to Riverview High School, graduated and moved on to University of Florida, where I majored in English and pre-law, and from there moved on to Stetson College of Law, where I graduated with my Juris Doctor.
And did you have experience with county government before you became a special magistrate?
So I found a passion with my courses that I took in local government and land use. So I really concentrated much of my coursework in those areas. Upon graduation, I married pretty quickly and moved to Miami, where my husband was born and raised, and found myself working in larger law firms on the private side of land use and development. So big projects, big scale developments, airport expansions were some of the bigger focus clients for about 7 or 8 years while in Miami. We decided after we started having children and we wanted to move back to Sarasota, you know, a little slower pace, community feel lifestyle we felt was best to raise our girls.
Sarasota beats Miami-Dade anytime.
No
right?
question.
Yeah.
So we returned to Sarasota. I was fortunate enough to have a connection where my superior, my boss in Miami, happened to practice law with Jorge Fernandez, who at the time was our county attorney.
I remember you, yeah,
And
sure.
so I was put into contact with Jorge, and I started as an assistant county attorney back in the late 90s.
So,
late
so
90s,
how long
yeah.
have you been a special magistrate?
Oh my goodness. I think I came and went, I think is the best way to say it. I started, I want to say 2001. I held the position for a brief period of time, maybe 6 months or so, when I was then asked by the county commission if I would fill a seat on the planning commission. So I actually did fill that seat for about 3 years and finished the term, and then was approached again and asked if I would, reconsider this position. So that was about 2004, 2005, and I went ahead and took on the position, and I've been here ever since.
Well, we have magistrates in the court system.
Mm-hmm.
How do the magistrates that we have in the courts differ from the county special magistrate?
So your court system, you're still following circuit court procedures, right? You're following formal rules of evidence. So those magistrates, are in line and in tune with what a circuit court judge would be doing.
How do they get their jobs as opposed to how you got yours?
I don't know if I can answer that clearly because I've never actually experienced the process of applying for a magistrate position through circuit court, but I can tell you with respect to the special magistrates, there's advertisements that they put out in the newspaper. A pool of candidates are selected. Those names go before the county commission for approval. Those names that are approved based upon the qualifications move on for interviews and final selection by the county administrator.
Okay. Well, in the court system, the chief judge appoints the magistrates and hearing officers, and they work full time.
Right.
Apparently, you can also maintain a practice, can't you? A private practice?
I can, yes. And that was, I think, the draw to me reconsidering and taking on this position back in 2005, 2004, 2005, was that I was able to create the flexibility I needed with a young family, wanting to take on an active role as a mother, and a community activist and a participant, and yet still be able to maintain and utilize my license.
So, a little bit of a plug here. You also work with your husband.
I have my license with this office. Maybe that's the best way to say it.
All right. So
we are happily married, I think, because of that reason.
all right. Well, let's talk about how varied your caseload is. What are the most common violations that you see? And first of all, let's talk basically where they come from. There's a body of ordinances and regulations, and what do they purport to do? What do they try to regulate?
Well, local government law comes back to the basis of health, safety, and welfare. We want to protect our communities, right? We want to keep them safe. We want to maintain the health of our community members and protect the overall welfare and integrity of our community. So I think that's the genesis of any county ordinance. That's what it's always coming back to, that review of if the ordinance and if the regulation is appropriate. So our ordinances the county's ordinances, I should say, look to instill that we maintain that order within our community. So these ordinances are all encompassing. There's so many different areas that our code of ordinances cover.
Let me throw out some things. Junk car on a front yard.
Absolutely.
That's something that might be a concern to a code enforcement officer.
Correct.
Somebody lets their grass, weeds and all, grow out of control on their lawn. Is that something that could come before you?
Absolutely. That would be considered more derelict property, where all those situations that you described would come into play with respect to that area that the county seeks to regulate. There's so many other areas as
How
well.
about loud noises?
Yes, nuisance is absolutely an area that the county strives to protect, keeping protection to neighbors.
How about things like newsstands and roadside stands that are on the right-of-way and that sort of thing? Is that...
Yeah, signage, lots of signage issues in the county. There's very strict regulations on where signs can be placed, and the sizes and how long and for what content.
So sometimes we see these air things that have like wiggle in the air, and they're trying to attract attention, and they may be out on a sidewalk or on the right of way. You would have to, the code enforcement officer would have to go there and say, this is not right, you got to move it.
Correct.
Okay. And how about things like building requirements, things like whether or not a shed is located too close to a property line?
Yeah, so those would, all those instances you just described would come under code enforcement with respect to building and zoning regulations.
What would you say, what category of things would you say are most common that you see most frequently when you have your hearings?
Right now, it's certainly changed over the last 15, 17 years I've been doing this, but I would say in recent past, the majority of my cases seem to circulate around unpermitted construction and construction outside the scope of what is permitted. So I would say the large majority of my cases deal with that subject matter.
So a person who, for example, wants to do a major remodel of their home and fails to get a permit, but hires maybe a handyman or even a contractor to do the work, requires a permit. And how do they find out if there's a permit?
That's required?
Yes.
So, there's a lot of, if you go to Sarasota County website, there are lots of different handouts and information that you can find. It's readily available on the website as well as in the permitting department as well as to what exactly what type of work requires permitting.
Okay, let's take a hypothetical case, starting at the beginning. And how do violations eventually come to you? What starts the process?
So it could be code, it could be a complaint-driven case.
Some neighbor complains or drives by and sees something. And
comes to building, permitting, code enforcement directly. It could be an anonymous complaint, or it could be someone who absolutely wants to identify themselves and voice their opinion. Or it can be just our code enforcement inspectors driving around their territories and witnessing violations that are occurring live during the day. So it's kind of split as to how those cases, start, so to speak.
so let's say a code enforcement responds to a complaint, goes to the site and sees what he perceives to be a violation. Mm-hmm. What does he do with that information? How does it start the ball rolling to get to you?
So if he feels that he has probable cause and there's enough evidence there to support a notice of violation, then he would issue that to the respondent, who we would consider the respondent, whether it's the contractor or the homeowner.
Is that mailed to him or handed to him in person? Or how does that work?
It could be any of the, if they're there, if the respondent is there, then it can be handed to them. Otherwise, it would be mailed to them, yes.
So the code enforcement officer actually does an inspection to confirm it. Do they take pictures or videos?
They do, and I should also add that typically when we're dealing just within the construction realm, there would be a stop work order also placed on site that would lead them back to the notice of violation.
And the code enforcement officer issues the stop work?
Correct. Yes,
Okay,
that would go hand in hand with the notice of violation.
This is something that's posted on the
Yes,
property as paper
correct.
and it's posted
Correct,
there.
yes.
Okay, and so you have to give notice, and what would the notice do? Does it say you have time to correct it, or does it just say show up in court, we'll see you then?
No, the notice simply identifies the violation, what the code enforcement officer perceives to be the violation, cites the specific code section, and typically provides 30 days for the respondent to come into compliance. So that's the beginning of it.
So there's really an effort to try to get voluntary compliance.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. And do you find most people do that, or they tend to fight it? Depends on the
Every case
violation,
is different. Yeah, I don't know if I can necessarily say one way or the other. Every case truly is different based on the facts.
Can they request an extension of the compliance time?
So they try to work with the code enforcement officer. You know, I don't think Sarasota County has set up its code enforcement system to be punitive. It's, you know, again, we're back to the health, safety, and welfare of the community. We're looking to live harmoniously. So absolutely, the code enforcement officers work with the respondents to try and help them come into compliance, steer them in the right directions, explain to them how they can seek after-the-fact permits, what would be the process to pull an after-the-fact permit, how would you close out that permit. So yes, all that goes into that process during that period of time so that it doesn't move on to the next phase.
Well, let's say the alleged offender says, I don't believe I did anything wrong. I disagree with the code enforcement officer. How does that translate into a charging document that you might see later on?
So at some point, the code enforcement officer is going to realize that the respondent is unwilling to come into compliance, regardless of how much additional time, as you had mentioned, that he or she has given them, and what efforts they've taken to try to come into compliance. It's a judgment call then upon the code enforcement officer to move it into the next phase, which would be issuance of an affidavit of violation. A little more formal. It would be served upon the respondent, and it would give them an additional time, typically, again, maybe 30 more days to come into compliance. But it is, like I had mentioned, it's a formal document, and it's also identifies a mandatory hearing time, and that hearing is set, and the respondents would be expected to respond.
I think what we need to clarify too, this is entirely a civil process.
Yes, sir. Yes.
There's no criminal
That is correct.
consequences to violating, but there's some pretty serious sanctions. We'll get to those in just a moment. So let's say there's been an affidavit of violation. I guess you're notified that you need to set a hearing. How does your docket get set?
So it moves through that time frame. It goes to the county attorney's office. They review it for completeness, making sure that due process has occurred and the notice is proper. And during this time, the code enforcement officer continues to work with the respondent to try to bring them into compliance. And at some point after that additional 30 days, the county attorney's office with the clerk's office with the code enforcement department makes a decision on when that case makes it to my docket. Okay,
so now you have, I assume, a number of cases have been set for hearing. What does your typical hearing day look like? Well, first off, when do you do these?
I typically do them every other Friday. I have a set time on Fridays that I hear these cases. I try to limit the cases. The ordinance actually calls for it, that these cases, if they are going to, estimated time that they may run is over 30 minutes, then we try to specially set them on any other given day so that everyone else who happens to be present isn't waiting for hours on end to have their case heard. So with that being said, cases can tend to settle and come off the docket as quickly as sometimes as they are placed on the docket, as the respondents realize that it's actually happening and that they're going to have to appear in our hearing. So many of times the cases are brought into compliance the day before the hearing. So it's always, it's very fluid, I would say.
Where do you conduct the hearings here in Sarasota County?
In the county commission chambers.
1600
Yes,
Ringling?
correct.
Okay. And tell me, do most of the respondents appear with or without an attorney?
I would say the majority of them appear pro se by themselves, but I would say 30 or 40%, 30% or so also retain an attorney to represent them.
So what is, lawyers speak about what the burden of proof is and what the standard is to find a violation. What is it in this context?
So the county has to prove their case by preponderance of the evidence. With that being said, there has to be competent substantial evidence for me to base my ruling. As I had mentioned earlier, though, there's a little twist to that because these cases are not, formal rules of evidence don't apply. And by that definition, it means hearsay is actually allowed in these proceedings. So while I can consider hearsay, it certainly goes to the weight of the evidence, certainly even if there's an objection by either party. I can't base my ruling solely on hearsay. There must be competent substantial evidence in the record to support a decision.
So typically the testimony will come to you from the code enforcement officer and the respondent. Are those the two parts? They bring in witnesses sometimes?
Oh yes, definitely. So it will be the code enforcement officer, and then if there's, sometimes they have neighbors that like to that they want to testify, that have information. Other staff members of the county, depending on what the issue is. So if it's an environmental case, typically you'll get a staff member from natural resources. You might get the building official. You may get the zoning administrator, depending on the issue, what the case represents. And then on the other side, most of the time it's the respondent, perhaps their attorney, engineers, architects, other people that might be involved in moving the case forward.
So who questions the witnesses on behalf of the county?
One of the assistant county attorneys assigned to code enforcement.
Kind of acts in the role as a prosecutor.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
And so they'll question them, and then there's cross-examination. And at the end of that, what's your authority if you find the violation not proven?
I can dismiss the case.
Okay. And then if it is proven, what are your options there as far as penalties?
Well, it wouldn't be penalty at that point. So it would be, this isn't what we're referring to right now. In this realm, this is just one little segment of the different kinds of cases that I hear. So right now, I think we're focusing on the construction
Correct.
Building cases.
Let's take that as an example.
Yeah,
Sure.
So in this case, typically I would be issuing an order which would give them a notice to correct. I would provide them with time and instructions.
So they have another opportunity.
They have another opportunity, and my orders are very detailed on what my expectations are, how I expect them to work through the process, the timing I would expect that they would have to follow. So that would be the first part of that notice in this evidentiary hearing sort of segment. I would issue an order to correct, and then I would also issue an additional notice for penalty hearing. So in the event they did not meet my timeframes and the specifications of my order, they have then hereby noticed of a penalty hearing that would be set in the future. And I would have already identified that date in the document.
So on your docket, you'd have a blend of cases where it's your first exposure to the violation to make a decision, but also you would have other penalty cases in
Correct.
there mixed in.
Correct, yes.
Let me ask you about a different area other than construction. Let's say it's an environmental thing. Removal of mangroves, which is a big problem sometimes. What would your typical order, assuming you found a violation, what would be a typical order you would enter that would address the compliance requirement?
Okay, so in that case, more times than not, there's attorneys representing the respondent as well as the county, and we try to work all together to come up with a master schedule because it is so complicated and involved. Sometimes it can be over a year or 2 years for the mitigation to occur and occur successfully. Sometimes DEP, there's other entities that are involved. So in that case, either the county attorney's office would draft an order that would be approved by the respondent's attorney or respondent's representative, and then it would be something that I would sign. And then we would have status hearings moving forward with the idea of what the ultimate goal was with the dates having to come into compliance.
And if someone is really intransigent, does not want to do any of those, you have power to assess a fine?
Correct.
And tell me about the lien process, how that works.
So the fine, if a respondent doesn't come into compliance, the fine is considered a lien on the property. The fine, there could be multiple ways the fines are assessed. It could be the first day identified, which based on the evidence and testimony, I identified a time, or when that first day is, and then the fine becomes a running fine, or it is a one-time lump sum fine.
And a lien means if you get to the point of a lien, the county can actually take title to the property.
Correct.
Okay. I see our time is up. These regulations are adopted to ensure proper repair and construction of structures and to protect the environment. Any one of us could inadvertently violate a county ordinance. Should that happen, alleged violators are given every opportunity to voluntarily correct and comply. When they do not, they may wind up in front of a special magistrate like Ms. Whitmer. The magistrate will determine if the complaint is legitimate and dismiss it if not. On the other hand, if it is sustained, it may cost the violator money, and in a serious case, like repeated violations, it could jeopardize the offender's livelihood. In the case of a homeowner, should a county lien be filed and enforced, their actual title to the property can be threatened. And if you believe a violation of the Sarasota County Code is occurring and needs correcting, it can be reported to the county at phone number 941-861-5000. Thank you for watching, and thank you, Meg, for sharing your time with us this afternoon.
Absolutely, thank you.
For more than 36 years, the Community Foundation of Sarasota County has worked one-on-one with estate planning attorneys and their clients to make a lasting impact through philanthropy. Stable, trusted, and knowledgeable, the Community Foundation safeguards the charitable legacies of donors to ensure that they continue for years to come. Visit www.cfsarasota.org or call 955-3000 for more information.